All right, folks, so let's deal with this was the earth created in 6 literal days argument, because I don't understand it. I don't understand how people can say that they believe that the word is inspired by God and, infallible, but yet we don't know that the earth was created in 6 literal days. So let's read what the text actually says. Now, there's two different forms of interpretation, right? There's eisegesis and there's exegesis, right? An exegetical interpretation would be reading out of the text what it actually says. So let's do that. Let's not read into the text anything. Let's just read what the text actually says and use some reason here, okay? So God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light that it was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Now, up until this point, we wouldn't say any of this is allegory. There's no reason to think that this is metaphor, that this is some sort of mystery language he's speaking. He's literally creating the earth, right, and separating light from darkness. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. So when you read this part, and there was evening and there was morning the first day, what reason do we have to say, well, that's not an actual day? There's no reason to assume that. So, and God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters." And so is the rest of this allegory. Because at that point, none of this makes any sense. So if we just make this portion up here allegory to fit our compromise that the earth wasn't created in 6 literal days, then we have to allegorize all of Genesis 1, which means we don't know anything about the creation. There's no reason for God to give us Genesis chapter 1 because he's not actually trying to explain anything. He's just trying to confuse everyone, which doesn't make any sense. So there's no way to reconcile the view that, well, this could be 1,000,000 years. There's nowhere in this text that supports that idea. You're assuming that based on what science is telling you, and we're told later on in the scriptures not to be fooled by this false science in the world. And you guys are compromising. This is an absolute compromise. It's not a big deal. It's not a salvific issue, but this is a compromise for sure. And to get all spiritual with it and say, well, the scripture says that, 1,000 years is like a day and a day is like 1,000 years. Pulling that out of context and making that mean that every time you see a day, it could mean 1,000 years is ridiculous. That's not what's being said there. What's being said there is that with God, time is irrelevant. That 1,000 years is not a long time for him. That's what it's saying. So I don't know. You can believe whatever you want, but I wanted to make this because I think it's abundantly clear what the answer to this question is. And if you want to compromise on it, then that's absolutely up to you. There's no way to exegete anything else out of Genesis 1. So, and in terms of the question was asked, what is time, or how do we know what time is? And we know what time is by observing movements of mass in the universe. So bodies of mass are moving, and it's our observance of the change in the universe that gives us what time. For example, the second hand on a clock is ticking around the watch, right? So you need some sort of observable event to create time, or to create the ability for humans to observe time. And when does God do that? Well, when he separates light from darkness, and the light he called day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and morning so there was an observable event that gave us a first day, right? So it's pretty clear that God is creating day and night as we know it. So there's no reason to assume that God is saying on the 6th day, on the 5th day, and then we're saying, well, no, that's not true. It's not the 6th or 5th day. You can do that, but listen, I'm just reading the text for what it says, right? I read the text, I get out of it what it says, and I believe it. And I'm not saying that makes me super spiritual or better than anybody, but how do you reconcile the 1,000,000-year or the gap theory view with Scripture? You can't. It doesn't teach that. So if we're basing our faith based on what the Scripture actually says, then we have to hold the literal 6-day creation. All right, and also let's go to Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, because if it's not clear enough in Genesis 1, it's pretty clear in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. How can we reconcile a seventh day Sabbath day, but the earth wasn't created in 6 literal days? That doesn't make any sense at all. So it was actually 1,000,000 years, but we celebrate the Sabbath day on the seventh day just because, it just doesn't make any sense, folks. It's 6 literal days. The scripture's clear on this. Again, we can compromise if we want, but the scripture says what it says.